The gravel crunched beneath Meredith Blackwood's worn leather boots as she stepped onto her front porch that Tuesday morning. Steam rose from the coffee mug cradled in her weathered hands, curling into the crisp Montana air like whispered secrets. The sun had barely crested the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded her of sunrises in places she had sworn never to think about again. 73 years had carved deep lines into her face, but her eyes remained sharp as broken glass. Those eyes had seen things that would haunt most people into madness. They had watched men die in desert hospitals and frozen tundras. They had stared down the barrels of guns in cities whose names appeared on no official maps. But that was another life, another woman entirely. Now she was simply Meredith Blackwood, retired librarian, widow of Arthur Blackwood, who had passed 8 years ago, and a woman who grew tomatoes in her garden and brought apple pies to church socials every Sunday. She was the kind of grandmother that children waved to from passing cars, the kind of neighbor who remembered everyone's birthday and kept hard candies in her apron pocket for the mail carrier's kids. She took a long sip of her coffee, savoring the bitterness, and let her gaze wander across her property. 15 years she had lived here in this remote corner of Montana, where the nearest neighbor was 4 miles down a dirt road and the sheriff's station sat 40 minutes away by car. She had chosen this place for its isolation, its defensible position, and the clear sight lines it provided in every direction. She had told herself those considerations were just old habits, paranoid thinking from a woman who had spent too many years looking over her shoulder. Nothing more. The coffee turned to ash in her mouth when she saw them. 3 motorcycles lay twisted in her driveway like broken metal bones chrome, catching the morning light at impossible angles. Their riders sprawled across the gravel in pools of blood that had turned dark and sticky in the cold mountain air. Most 73-year-old women would have screamed. Most would have dropped their coffee and run for the phone to dial 911 with trembling fingers. Meredith Blackwood set her coffee mug down on the porch railing with a soft click. Then she walked toward her barn. The structure stood weathered and gray against the Montana sky, its paint peeling and its boards warped by decades of harsh winters. To anyone passing by, it looked like nothing more than an old storage building filled with rusted farm equipment and forgotten memories. They would be wrong. Meredith's arthritic fingers moved with surprising precision across the combination lock hidden behind a loose board near the entrance. The numbers came to her without thought, burned into her muscle memory by years of repetition. 3 turns left, 2 right, 1 left again. The lock clicked open. Inside the barn smelled of dust and hay and motor oil. Cobwebs draped across forgotten tools like funeral shrouds. But Meredith walked past all of it with purpose, her boots leaving prints in the undisturbed dust as she moved toward the far corner, where a stack of hay bales had stood untouched for 2 decades. She moved the bales aside with effort that made her shoulders ache. Beneath them, hidden under a layer of rotted canvas, sat a steel case that hadn't been opened in 20 years. The case was military grade, designed to survive drops from aircraft and submersion in salt water. Its surface bore no markings, no serial numbers, nothing that could identify its origin or owner. She had carried it across 3 continents and through more border crossings than she could count. Her fingers found the secondary lock, a biometric scanner disguised as a simple clasp. It read her fingerprint and clicked open with a soft hiss of released pressure. Inside, arranged with the precision of a surgeon's instruments, lay the tools of her former life. Pristine medical supplies occupied the top tray. Field dressings, suture kits, morphine ampules, antibiotics, everything needed to keep a man alive when the nearest hospital might as well be on the moon. Below them rested a Glock 19 in a worn leather holster, its magazine still full, its action still smooth despite the years. Beside the weapon sat 3 passports, each bearing her photograph but different names. Elena Vasquez, Margaret Thompson, Catherine Wells. Identities she had worn like masks in a dozen different countries. Meredith lifted the medical supplies and carried them back into the morning light. The first biker was the largest of the 3, a mountain of a man with graying temples and a beard that had been neatly trimmed before someone had used his face as a punching bag. His leather vest bore patches that identified him as a road captain of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. Blood seeped from a gash across his scalp, matting his hair into dark clumps. His breathing came in shallow gasps that rattled with each exhale. She had seen worse, much worse. In the field hospitals of places that did not officially exist, she had held men's intestines in her bare hands while bullets screamed overhead. She had performed amputations by flashlight in basement shelters while buildings collapsed around her. She had kept soldiers alive through wounds that should have killed them in minutes, buying them enough time to say goodbye to the people they loved through satellite phones with dying batteries. This was nothing compared to that. Meredith knelt beside the big man and began cleaning his head wound with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved without hesitation, muscle memory overriding the stiffness of age and years of disuse. She irrigated the gash, checked for skull fractures, and began suturing with stitches so neat they could have passed inspection at any trauma center in the country. The man's eyes fluttered open. Confusion swam in those eyes at first, pain making everything hazy and uncertain. Then they focused on her face, on the weathered features of a grandmother kneeling over him in the morning light, and the confusion deepened into something like disbelief. "Who are you?" he wheezed, each word clearly costing him. Meredith finished the last stitch and tied it off with a small knot. "Someone who knows what it looks like when men are left to die," she replied. Her voice carried an edge that had not been there during her morning coffee, a hardness that belonged to someone else entirely. "Lie still. You've lost blood, and I need to check your friends." She moved to the second biker before he could respond. This one was younger, maybe late 30s, with arms as thick as fence posts and a face that had been handsome before someone had rearranged its features with their fists. His left arm bent at an angle that made her jaw tighten. Compound fracture, the bone pressing against skin that had not yet broken. He would need a hospital eventually, but she could stabilize him for now. The third man was barely more than a boy, 25 at most, with blonde hair matted with blood where someone had worked him over with something heavier than fists. A crowbar perhaps, or a length of pipe. His breathing was steady but shallow, and when she checked his pupils, one was larger than the other. Concussion, possibly serious. Meredith sat back on her heels and surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. 3 men beaten nearly to death, left in her driveway like garbage. Their motorcycles destroyed, with what looked like deliberate precision fuel tanks ruptured. Engines cracked. This had not been random violence. This had been methodical, professional. Someone had wanted information from these men. When they did not get it, they had decided to make a point. The big man had managed to prop himself up on one elbow, watching her work on his companions with eyes that held a new kind of wariness. She could see him reassessing her, cataloging the confident way she handled the medical supplies, the expertise evident in every movement. "Name's Garrett," he said, his voice stronger now. "Garrett Thornton. That's Colton Webb, the young one. We call him Colt. And the big guy with the broken arm is Wade Preston. Goes by Bear." Meredith nodded without looking up from her examination of Colt's head wound. "Who did this to you?" Garrett's expression darkened. "Serpents. Local outfit that's been trying to muscle in on our territory for months. They wanted us to transport something for some cartel contacts of theirs. We said no. We don't touch that poison, never have. They said they'd make an example. And then they just left you here. Said they had other business to handle first. Said they'd be back to finish the job after they took care of something else." Meredith's hands paused for just a moment, so briefly that Garrett might not have noticed. But she noticed. She had chosen this property for its isolation. The nearest town was 20 miles away. The nearest major highway was 30. There was no reason for anyone to come down her mile-long driveway unless they were specifically looking for her. "How did you end up on my property?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Garrett's brow furrowed. "Honestly, ma'am, I don't rightly know. We were trying to outrun them on Route 12 when they ran us off the road. Next thing I remember clearly is waking up here with you stitching my head." Meredith finished her examination and stood ignoring the protest of her knees. She looked down the long dirt driveway that led to her property, following it with her eyes until it disappeared over a small rise about a mile distant. Empty now, but not for long. In her experience, men who left others for dead rarely stayed gone. They came back to clean up loose ends, to make sure there were no witnesses, no survivors who could identify them later. The fact that these serpents had left at all meant they had somewhere else to be first. But they would return. "Can any of you move?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Garrett tried to push himself up further and immediately collapsed back against the gravel, his face going gray with pain. "Don't think so, ma'am. Whatever they gave us, some kind of injection, it's still in our system. Can barely feel my legs." "A sedative, then. Something to keep them docile while the beating happened. Something that would wear off in a few hours, long after the serpents returned to finish their work." Meredith made her decision without hesitation. "I'm going to move you and your friends inside my house. Then I'm going to make some calls." Garrett's eyes widened with alarm, and he reached out to grab her wrist with surprising strength. "No cops," he said urgently. "Please, ma'am, this is club business. You call the cops, it makes things worse for everyone. Trust me." Meredith looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up at his face. Something in her expression made him release his grip immediately, his fingers opening as if he had touched a hot stove. "I wasn't planning to call the police," she said quietly. It took her nearly 40 minutes to move all three men into her house, using an old wheelbarrow from the barn, and a stubborn determination that would have surprised anyone who knew her only as the kindly retired librarian from town. Garrett remained conscious throughout, gritting his teeth against the pain as she maneuvered him onto her living room couch. The other two Colton bears she arranged on air mattresses dragged down from the attic. They were not light men. By the time she finished, sweat dampened her gray hair and her shoulders burned with exertion. She stood in her kitchen, hands braced against the counter, catching her breath and listening. The house was quiet. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out as it hunted. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. But Meredith knew they would not last. She moved through her home with a purpose that would have seemed strange to anyone watching. From a false bottom in her bedroom dresser, she retrieved a satellite phone that had not been used in 8 years. Its battery was dead, but she had a charger hidden in the same compartment. From behind a loose board in the basement, she pulled out a waterproof case containing emergency, cash, gold coins, and documents that could get her across any border in the world within 48 hours. And from a hidden compartment in her kitchen pantry, concealed behind a row of mason jars filled with preserves, she took out something she had hoped never to touch again. The Glock 19 felt familiar in her hands. Its weight settled into her palm like an old friend, every curve and edge remembered by muscles that had not forgotten their training, despite 15 years of peace. She checked the magazine. Still full 15 rounds of hollow-point ammunition that she had loaded herself before burying the weapon in her pantry. She chambered a round with a practiced motion that would have shocked anyone who knew her only as Meredith Blackwood, the woman who brought apple pies to church socials. The satellite phone came to life on the third attempt. She had to wait for it to acquire a signal, watching the small screen cycle through connection protocols while her mind ran through scenarios and calculations. The number she dialed was burned into her memory, though she had never expected to use it again. It rang twice before someone answered. "Control, Cabell." The voice was crisp, professional, and utterly without warmth. It could have belonged to anyone. It could have belonged to a machine. "This is Nightingale," Meredith said. She had silence on the other end, a long, weighted pause that stretched across the miles between them. "Nightingale was decommissioned," the voice finally replied. "Nightingale was never decommissioned, just relocated." She could hear typing in the background, now fingers moving rapidly across a keyboard. Someone was pulling her file, accessing records that supposedly no longer existed. "I need information," Meredith continued without waiting for a response. "I need everything you have on a motorcycle gang called the Serpents operating in rural Montana. Focus on current leadership, cartel connections, and methods. This is highly irregular. So is retirement." More typing, more silence. "I'll need to verify your identity," the voice said finally. "Authentication protocols have changed since your time." Meredith smiled without humor. "Hotel Echo Niner Niner Lima. Authorization code Whiskey Tango Foxtrot Delta 77. Handler Harrison Cole, operational period 1978 through 95. Do you need my blood type too?" The typing stopped. "Please hold." Hold music played softly in her ear, some generic classical piece that she recognized from countless hours spent waiting for similar calls in decades past. She used the time to check on her patients, moving silently through the living room, where Garrett had fallen into an exhausted sleep, and the other two remained unconscious but stable. The phone clicked. "Meredith." This voice was different, older, rougher, carrying the weight of years and secrets. "Harrison." Harrison Cole had been her handler for the final 5 years of her career, the only person in the agency who had known about her growing desire to disappear. He had helped her fake her death in that warehouse fire in Moldova. He had personally overseen the creation of Meredith Blackwood, retired librarian, widow church volunteer. He had been the last person from her old life to know she was still alive. "This line is supposed to be dead," he said. "You're supposed to be dead. Apparently not dead enough." She heard him sigh, a sound of resignation and concern that bridged the years since their last conversation. "What happened?" Meredith told him. About the bikers in her driveway. About the Serpents who had beaten them and promised to return. About the professional efficiency of the attack and the strange coincidence that had brought 3 dying men to her remote property. Harrison was silent for a long moment after she finished. "Meredith, listen to me carefully. There have been rumors lately, questions being asked about old operations. Someone has been digging through archived files, looking for connections to operations that were supposed to have been erased decades ago." The words hit her like a physical blow. That's impossible. Those files were burned. I watched them burn. Physical files, yes, but memories have a way of surfacing when the right pressure is applied. Meredith's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of pressure? 3 months ago, Dmitry Volkov was released from a Russian prison. The name struck her like ice water. Prague, 1981. She could still see his face twisted with rage as the Czech authorities dragged him away. Could still hear his voice hoarse from screaming, making promises of vengeance that had echoed through the years. That's impossible, she whispered. He was sentenced to life. The charges I gave the Czechs should have kept him locked away forever. The Soviet Union fell. The Czech Republic joined NATO. Old alliances shifted, old debts were called in. Volkov had friends, people who owed him favors from before his imprisonment. He's been very busy since his release, paying for information, following paper trails. Apparently, he connected Elena Vasquez to a warehouse fire in Moldova and started asking why there was no body. Meredith closed her eyes. 43 years. She had been running for 43 years, and she had allowed herself to believe that it was over. That she could grow old in peace on her little Montana farm. That the ghosts of her past would stay buried where she had left them. She should have known better. How long do I have? She asked. If he sent those bikers to draw you out, he already knows where you are. When they don't report back, he'll send more. Or he'll come himself. The sound of engines broke the morning quiet. Meredith moved to the window without thinking, the phone still pressed to her ear. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see them. 2 black SUVs cresting the hill at the end of her driveway, moving fast but controlled. Professional approach. Military spacing. Meredith, you need to disappear. Tonight. I can have an extraction team to you within 6 hours. No. This is suicide. You're 73 years old. These aren't street thugs playing at being tough. Volkov will send professionals, killers with training and resources that... I said no. She watched the SUVs draw closer, counting the figures visible through the tinted windows. 4 in the lead vehicle. At least 4 more in the second. 8 men, possibly more armed and trained, and coming for her. This is my home, Harrison. I've been running for 43 years. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. And I am done letting men like Dmitry Volkov decide how and when I die. Meredith, goodbye, Harrison. She ended the call and slipped the phone into her pocket. The SUVs had reached the halfway point of her driveway, now close enough that she could make out details through her binoculars. The men inside wore dark clothing, tactical gear, visible beneath unzipped jackets. They carried themselves with the particular stillness of professional killers, men who had done this kind of work before and would do it again. But they were not expecting what they would find. The serpents who had beaten those bikers had been thugs, criminals with guns and muscles, but no real training. The men approaching now were different. They moved like soldiers, like operators who had been forged in the same fires that had shaped her decades ago. They thought they were hunting a ghost. They had no idea they were about to face the woman who had created that ghost in the first place. Meredith checked her weapon one final time, then moved toward the back of the house where a door led to a covered walkway connecting to the barn. The 3 bikers were still unconscious or sleeping, vulnerable and defenseless. She could not protect them and fight at the same time. She would have to be clever. The hidden cellar beneath her kitchen had been Arthur's idea, one of many modifications he had helped her make to the property over the years. He had never asked why his wife wanted a concealed room with reinforced walls and a separate ventilation system. He had simply loved her enough to trust that she had her reasons. God, she missed him. The entrance was hidden behind a set of flour sacks stacked against the pantry wall. Meredith moved them aside, quickly revealing a trap door that opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Garrett stirred as she entered the living room. What's happening? He asked, his voice still thick with whatever sedative had been pumped into his system. Company, Meredith replied, the unwelcome kind. She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he stumbled toward the kitchen. His eyes widened when he saw the hidden entrance. Lady, who the hell are you? Someone who made a lot of enemies a long time ago. Now help me with your friends. It took precious minutes to move Baron Colt into the cellar. Precious minutes during which Meredith could hear the SUVs coming to a stop outside, could hear car doors opening and boots hitting gravel. But finally, all 3 bikers were safely hidden below, and she slid the trap door closed and replaced the flour sacks with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times before. Stay quiet, she told them through the floor. No matter what you hear, you stay down there and you stay quiet. Understand? Garrett's voice came back, muffled but clear. What are you going to do? Meredith did not answer. She smoothed her gray hair, adjusted her apron, and walked toward the front door with the shuffling gait of a woman whose joints ached on cold mornings. The Glock was hidden in the small of her back, concealed beneath the loose fabric of her house dress. She opened the door to find four men on her porch. They were younger than she had expected, late 20s to early 30s, with the hard eyes and scarred knuckles of men who had grown up fighting. One of them, the largest, wore a leather vest with a serpent patch that identified him as a member of the gang Garrett had mentioned. But the other three were different. They wore no identifying marks, and their weapons were held with the casual confidence of professional operators. Military haircuts, alert postures, eyes that swept the environment, constantly cataloging threats and exits. Mercenaries, she realized. Private military contractors hired to provide muscle for whatever operation Volkov was running. The largest serpent stepped forward. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a politeness so thin it was nearly transparent. "Name's Vince. We're looking for some friends of ours. 3 men on motorcycles. They might be hurt." "You seen anything?" Meredith allowed a slight tremor to enter her hands, clutching the doorframe as if for support. "Motorcycles? Oh my goodness, you mean those awful machines I heard last night? The noise woke me from a dead sleep, it did. But I haven't seen anyone. Is everything all right?" Vince's eyes swept past her into the house, searching for signs of occupancy or disturbance. She had been careful to hide the medical supplies and clean up any blood that might have transferred during the transport. "Mind if we look around?" one of the contractors asked. His accent marked him as Eastern European. "Russian, perhaps, or Ukrainian?" "Well, I suppose that would be all right," Meredith said doubtfully, "though I can't imagine why anyone would want to hide on my little property. It's just me and my chickens out here." The men exchanged glances. She could read their assessment in those looks. Old woman, harmless, probably going senile. Exactly what she wanted them to think. Two of the contractors headed toward the barn, while Vince and his companion began a circuit of the house. Meredith stood in the doorway, wringing her hands and making small, worried sounds that completed the picture of elderly confusion. "These men you're looking for," she called after Vince. "They're not dangerous, are they? Should I be worried?" "Nothing for you to worry about, ma'am," Vince replied without looking back. "Just some boys who owe a debt that needs paying." Meredith watched them search, noting their patterns, their communication methods, the way they covered each other's blind spots. Professional but not exceptional. They had been trained well, but they had grown complacent, overconfident. They did not check the kitchen. They did not notice that the flour sacks against the wall had been recently moved, leaving marks in the dust on the floor. They did not see the way Meredith's eyes tracked their movements with the predatory patience of a hawk watching mice. After 20 minutes, they reconvened in her driveway. The contractors spoke in low voices while Vince approached her one final time. "Doesn't look like anyone's here," he said, studying her face with renewed interest. "But if you do see anything at all, you give us a call." He pressed a business card into her hand, a phone number, nothing else. "Of course, young man. I hope you find your friends." Vince held her gaze for a moment longer, and she saw the suspicion there, the instinct that something was not right. But then he shook his head slightly, dismissing the thought, and turned back toward the waiting SUVs. Meredith watched them drive away. She watched until the dust settled and the sound of engines faded into the mountain silence. She watched until she was certain that they were truly gone, at least for now. Then she went back inside. Garrett was waiting at the top of the cellar stairs, his face pale but his eyes sharp. "That was a hell of an act," he said. "You had them completely fooled." "Not completely," Meredith replied. "They'll be back. Men like that always come back." She moved past him to the window, scanning the empty driveway and the road beyond. "Who are you really, Amir?" Garrett asked quietly. Meredith did not turn around. "I told you, someone who knows what it looks like when men are left to die." That's not an answer. No, it was not. But the truth was something she had not spoken aloud in over 4 decades. The truth was buried beneath layers of false identities and fabricated histories locked away in classified files that supposedly no longer existed. The truth was that Meredith Blackwood had once been Elena Vasquez's codename Nightingale, one of the CIA's most effective field operatives during the final decades of the Cold War. She had been a battlefield medic who also knew how to kill with surgical precision. She had saved lives and ended them in equal measure, serving causes that history would never record. But that woman had died in a warehouse fire in Moldova in 1995. Only she had not. Harrison had helped her disappear, erasing Elena Vasquez from existence and creating Meredith Blackwood in her place. A new identity, a new life, a second chance at the peace she had earned through 30 years of blood and sacrifice. And now Dmitry Volkov was threatening to take it all away. I was a librarian, she said, finally turning to face Garrett with the mild expression of a grandmother who had nothing to hide. For almost 30 years, I worked at a little library in Ohio. Then my husband passed, and I came out here to be closer to nature. Garrett's expression said he was not buying a word of it. Lady, I've been around dangerous people my whole life. I know what it looks like. And you just convinced 4 armed killers that you were nothing but a harmless old woman, while 3 men they were hunting lay hidden 10 feet away. Meredith smiled, and there was something cold in that smile, something that made Garrett step back involuntarily. Perhaps I'm simply a good liar. Before he could respond, Bear called up from the cellar. Colt's waking up. He's asking for water. The moment passed. Meredith spent the next several hours tending to her patients, checking wounds, administering antibiotics, and monitoring Colt's concussion symptoms. The young man drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about people who were not there, and she stayed by his side, dabbing his forehead with a cool cloth and speaking softly until he settled. Night fell over Montana. The 3 bikers had been moved back to the living room where they could rest more comfortably on actual furniture. Garrett refused to sleep, positioning himself near the window where he could watch the road despite Meredith's assurances that the men would not return until daylight at the earliest. How do you know that? He asked. Because professionals don't like operating in unfamiliar terrain at night. They'll want to surveil the property, first identify weak points and entry routes. That takes time. Garrett absorbed this information with the expression of a man who was beginning to understand just how deep the water had become. You said they'd come back for us, he said slowly. But that's not really true, is it? They're not here for us at all. They're here for you. Meredith did not deny it. There's a man who has been looking for me for a very long time. I believe he hired your serpents to find me, possibly to flush me out of hiding. When you refused to cooperate with their original demands, they saw an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Who is he? This man who's hunting you. Someone from my past, someone I should have killed when I had the chance. The words came out flat, empty of emotion. But inside, Meredith felt the old anger stirring. The cold fury that had driven her through 3 decades of operations that had made her legendary in circles that would never acknowledge her existence. Dmitry Volkov had been a monster. In Prague in 1981, she had discovered the full extent of his operation. Human trafficking on an industrial scale with children as young as 5 being shipped to buyers across Europe and the Middle East. The official mission had been to terminate him, quietly eliminate a threat to American interests without creating an international incident. But when she had seen those children in the shipping containers terrified and crying and reaching for mothers they would never see again, something inside her had snapped. She had not killed Volkov cleanly and quietly as ordered. She had destroyed his entire network. She had freed every child she could find and burned everything else to the ground. And instead of putting a bullet in his head, she had fed information to the Czech authorities that ensured he would spend the rest of his life in prison. She had wanted him to suffer. She had wanted him to spend decades locked in a cell knowing that everything he had built was gone, that the woman who had taken it from him was out there somewhere, living free. It had been a mistake. 43 years later, that mistake had come home to roost. Meredith moved to the window where Garrett stood watching and placed a hand on his arm. You should rest, she said gently. Whatever happens tomorrow, you'll need your strength. I could say the same to you. I've survived on less sleep than you can imagine, young man. One more night won't kill me. Garrett studied her face in the dim light, searching for answers she was not ready to give. Why are you doing this? He asked finally. Why help us at all? You could have left us in your driveway, could have called an ambulance and let them deal with it, could have driven away the moment you saw what kind of trouble we'd bring to your door. Meredith considered the question. She could have told him about duty, about the oaths she had sworn decades ago to protect the innocent. She could have given him a speech about honor and sacrifice, about the code that had guided her through 30 years of service. But the truth was simpler than that. Because everyone deserves a chance to be something better than what they were, she said quietly. And because I've spent 40 years running from who I used to be. Maybe it's time I stopped running. Garrett nodded slowly, as if this answer made a kind of sense that his earlier questions had not. If it comes to a fight tomorrow, he said, we'll stand with you, all 3 of us. Whatever's in our system, whatever shape we're in, we'll stand. Meredith looked at him, at this stranger who had arrived bleeding in her driveway just hours ago, and felt something she had not experienced in many years. Hope. Get some sleep, she said again. Tomorrow we'll see what we're dealing with. She left him at the window and moved through her darkened house, checking locks and listening for sounds of approach. The night remained quiet, but she knew it would not last. Volkov would not wait forever. His patience had limits even after 43 years. In the kitchen, she retrieved the phone she had taken from one of the serpents during their visit. She had been waiting for the right moment to examine it more closely away from Garrett's watching eyes. What she found made her blood run cold. Photographs filled the phone's gallery. Photographs of her house, her barn, her garden, her mailbox with its hand-painted numbers. Photographs taken from the road over a period of what looked like 3 weeks, documenting her daily routine with the precision of a professional surveillance operation. Her morning coffee on the porch, her trips to town for groceries, her Tuesday evening book club at the library in Stevensville, even her Sunday mornings at church sitting in the same pew where she had sat for 15 years. Someone had been watching her. Someone who knew enough to wait to observe, to learn her patterns and her habits before making their move. The text messages were worse. Most were in Russian, which she read fluently after years of operations in Eastern Europe. They spoke of payment for information of contacts in American intelligence agencies of an old woman living alone who had once gone by a different name. One message sent just hours before the attack on the bikers made her hands begin to tremble. Confirm target at listed location. Proceed as discussed. Eliminate witnesses. 43 years we have waited. The Nightingale's song ends tonight. They knew who she was. They knew everything. And they were coming to kill her. Meredith set the phone down on her kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment. Her reflection gazed back at her from the darkened window, an old woman with gray hair and lined face and eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. She had thought she was done with this life. She had thought she could die peacefully in her bed, surrounded by the quiet she had earned through decades of service and sacrifice. But some debts could never be paid. Some ghosts could never be laid to rest. And some enemies would follow you to the ends of the earth, no matter how many years passed or how many names you changed. Dmitry Volkov had found her. After 43 years, the past had finally caught up. Meredith picked up the satellite phone and dialed the number one more time. Control. This is Nightingale. Put me through to Harrison Cole. A pause, then a click. Meredith, what's happened? She told him about the phone, about the surveillance photographs, about the message confirming her identity and location. She spoke in a flat, professional voice, as if she were delivering a routine operational report rather than describing the end of everything she had built. Harrison was silent when she finished. I can still get you out, he said finally. The extraction offer stands. Say the word and I'll have a team there by morning. Meredith looked around her kitchen at the copper pots hanging above the stove and the herb garden growing in the window and the photograph of Arthur on the wall beside the door. This was her home. This was the life she had fought and bled and killed to earn. And she was done letting men like Dmitry Volkov take things from her. No extraction, she said, but I need everything you have on Volkov's current operation. Safe houses, personnel, weapons, communications. Everything. Meredith, this is insane. You're 73 years old. Even in your prime, taking on an operation this size alone would have been suicide. Then it's a good thing I'm not alone. She thought of Garrett at the window of Baron Colt, sleeping in her living room, of 3 strangers who had stumbled into her life through violence and circumstance. They were not trained operators. They were not professional killers. But they were willing to fight, and sometimes that was enough. You have 12 hours, she told Harrison. After that, I start making inquiries through other channels. What other channels? There's no one left from the old days. Everyone who knew you is either dead or retired. Meredith smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile, something that Harrison could not see, but could somehow sense across the miles between them. Then I'll make new friends. She ended the call and set the phone down. Through the window, the first gray light of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern mountains. A new day was coming, bringing with it threats and challenges that would test everything she had left. But Meredith Blackwood had faced worse. She had walked through fire and come out the other side. And if Dmitry Volkov wanted to finish what he had started 43 years ago in Prague, she would be ready. The Nightingale was not dead. She had simply been sleeping. And now at last she was awake. The memory came to her unbidden, as it always did in the small hours before dawn. Prague, 1981. She had been 30 years old then, with dark hair and steady hands, and eyes that had not yet learned to see ghosts in every shadow. Elena Vasquez, codename Nightingale, deployed to Czechoslovakia under diplomatic cover to eliminate a problem that had been growing like cancer in the heart of Europe. Dmitry Volkov. The name had meant nothing to her when Harrison first briefed her in a safe house outside of Vienna. Another target, another mission, another name to add to a list that had grown long over the years. Volkov was a mid-level operator in the Soviet trafficking network responsible for moving merchandise across the Iron Curtain to buyers in the West. Merchandise. That was the word they used in the briefings, as if they were discussing automobiles or electronics rather than human beings. She had not understood the full scope of his operation until she arrived in Prague, until she bribed her way into the warehouse district along the Vltava River and saw with her own eyes what merchandise truly meant to men like Dmitry Volkov. Children. Dozens of them packed into shipping containers like cattle, their eyes hollow and their bodies thin from weeks of inadequate food and water. The youngest could not have been more than 5 years old. The oldest were perhaps 12, their faces carrying the knowledge of horrors that no child should ever have to understand. Elena had stood in the shadows of that warehouse, watching Volkov's men load another container onto a waiting truck, and felt something inside her break. The mission parameters had been clear. Terminate Volkov. Make it look like an accident or a robbery gone wrong. Avoid international incidents that could complicate ongoing negotiations between Washington and Moscow. Clean, quiet, professional. But as she watched those children being loaded like cargo, Elena Vasquez made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would not simply kill Dmitry Volkov. She would destroy everything he had built. The operation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of following money trails and bribing officials and planting evidence that would be impossible to ignore. 3 weeks of midnight raids on subsidiary locations, freeing children and burning records and leaving Volkov's organization in chaos. And when she finally confronted him in his office, overlooking the Charles Bridge, she did not put a bullet in his head, as her orders demanded. She handed him over to the Czech authorities instead, with enough evidence to ensure he would never see freedom again. Volkov had screamed as they dragged him away, screamed in Russian and Czech and broken English, his face contorted with a rage that transcended language. "I will find you," he had howled, fighting against the hands that held him. "I will spend my life finding you. And when I do, I will make you watch everyone you love die before I let you join them." Elena had watched him disappear into the back of a police van, and she had felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Let him rot, she had thought. Let him spend the rest of his miserable life in a cell, knowing that everything he built was ash. She had been young then, young enough to believe that prisons held forever, young enough to believe that 43 years would be long enough to bury the past. The memory faded as dawn broke over Montana, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her of fire. Meredith stood at her kitchen window, coffee growing cold in her hands, watching the empty road that led to her property. They had not come during the night, but they would come today. Behind her, the 3 bikers were stirring, roused by the smell of eggs and bacon that she had prepared despite the circumstances. Some habits died hard, and feeding hungry men was one she had never been able to shake. Garrett appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving better than he had the day before. The sedative had worked its way out of his system, and though his wounds were still fresh, he carried himself with the careful alertness of a man who had spent years expecting trouble. "You've been up all night," he observed. It was not a question. "Sleep is a luxury I can't afford right now." She set a plate in front of him and began preparing 2 more for Bear and Colt. The young one was awake now, his concussion symptoms improving, though his head still throbbed with every movement. Bear's arm had been properly splinted, and while it would need professional medical attention, eventually he could function well enough for what lay ahead. "Tell me about your club," Meredith said as she worked. "The Iron Wolves, what kind of men are you?" Garrett considered the question while he ate. "We're not saints," he said finally. "We've done things that wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. But we have rules, lines we don't cross. No trafficking, no hard drugs, no hurting civilians. We protect our own and mind our business. And the serpents, no rules, no lines. They'll move anything for anyone if the price is right. Been pushing into our territory for the past year, trying to muscle us into becoming their distribution network." His jaw tightened. "We told them no." This was their response. Meredith nodded slowly. "The men who beat you were serpents, but the men who came looking for you yesterday were something else. Private military contractors, probably Russian. Volkov's people." "This Volkov," Garrett said. "You keep mentioning him. Who is he to you?" She set the other plates down and took a seat across from him. 43 years ago, I destroyed his operation and sent him to prison. He swore he would find me and make me pay. I thought he would die behind bars. I was wrong. So this whole thing, us getting beat half to death on your property, it was all about drawing you out." "I believe so. The serpents were probably hired to create a situation that would force me to reveal myself. When you refused to cooperate with their original demands, they saw an opportunity to use you as bait." Garrett absorbed this information with the expression of a man who was rapidly recalculating his understanding of the world. "And now Volkov knows exactly where I am. and he's coming to finish what he started in Prague. Colt and Verity had made their way to the kitchen during this exchange, drawn by the smell of food and the gravity of the conversation. They stood in the doorway, listening, their faces reflecting varying degrees of comprehension and concern. "What's the play?" Bear asked, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "We running or fighting?" Meredith looked at each of them in turn. Three strangers who had stumbled into her life through violence and circumstance. Three men who owed her nothing and had every reason to disappear into the mountains and pretend none of this had ever happened. "I'm not running," she said quietly. "This is my home. I've been running for 43 years and I'm done. But this isn't your fight. You can leave. Take one of the vehicles in my barn drive until you hit the highway and never look back. No one would blame you." Garrett glanced at his brothers, some silent communication passing between them. "We owe you our lives," he said simply. "You could have left us to die in your driveway. You didn't. Where I come from, that means something, and where I come from, too," Bear added. Colt nodded, though his young face was pale with fear he was trying hard not to show. "Then we fight," Meredith said. "But we do it my way. I've spent 30 years of my life learning how to survive situations exactly like this one. If you want to live through what's coming, you follow my instructions exactly. No questions, no hesitation. Understood?" Three nods. Three men who had no idea what they were agreeing to, but they would learn. The training began that afternoon. Meredith had converted her barn into something that would have surprised anyone who knew her only as the kindly retired librarian from town. Behind the hay bales and rusted farm equipment lay a space that had been carefully designed for exactly this purpose. A shooting range, improvised but functional, with targets set at various distances. A hand-to-hand combat area with mats salvaged from a closed gymnasium in Missoula. Racks of weapons that she had accumulated over 15 years of quiet preparation, each one maintained with the obsessive care of someone who understood that a jammed gun at the wrong moment meant death. "First rule," she told them as they stood in the center of the space. "Forget everything you think you know about fighting. Movies lie. Television lies. Real combat is ugly, brutal, and over in seconds. The person who hesitates dies." She demonstrated with a fluidity that belied her 73 years, her body moving through strike patterns that left the three bikers staring in disbelief. "How is that possible?" Colt breathed. "You're old," Meredith smiled without warmth. "Age takes many things, but muscle memory properly trained lasts until the day you die. I've been practicing these movements for 50 years. They're as natural to me as breathing." She spent the afternoon teaching them the basics. Not the flashy techniques of martial arts movies, but the practical, brutal methods of close-quarters combat that had kept her alive through 3 decades of operations. How to disable an opponent with a single strike. How to use their own momentum against them. How to kill quickly and quietly when there was no other choice. Garrett proved the most capable, his military background giving him a foundation to build upon. Bear was strong but slow, his size making him powerful but predictable. Colt was quick and eager, but his youth made him reckless, prone to overcommitting to attacks that left him vulnerable. "You're not trying to win a fight," Meredith told him after he had ended up on his back for the 5th time. "You're trying to survive one. There's a difference. Pride will get you killed faster than anything else." As the sun began to set, she moved them to the shooting range. "Have any of you handled firearms before?" "I was a sniper in Afghanistan," Garrett said. 2 tours. Bear did some hunting when he was younger. Colt's never fired anything bigger than a BB gun. Meredith nodded, adjusting her approach accordingly. "Then you'll work with what you know, Garrett. Bear will build on your experience. Colt, you stay close to me and do exactly what I tell you. A gun in untrained hands is more dangerous to friends than enemies." She showed them her arsenal, explaining each weapon's strengths and limitations. Rifles for distance, shotguns for close quarters, handguns for last resort, grenades and flashbangs for when things went sideways and you needed to create chaos to escape. "The men coming for us will be professionals," she said. "They'll be better armed, better trained, and they'll have numbers on their side. Our advantage is terrain. I know this property. I've spent 15 years preparing for exactly this scenario. We use that knowledge, we might just survive." Night fell again, and Meredith gathered them in her living room for the conversation she had been avoiding. "You've agreed to fight," she said, "but you deserve to know what you're fighting for, and that means understanding who I really am." She told them. Not everything. There were secrets that would go with her to the grave operations, so classified that even speaking of them could trigger automatic responses from agencies that officially did not exist. But she told them enough. About Elena Vasquez and the 30 years she had spent in the shadows of the Cold War. about the missions that had taken her to every continent, serving causes that history would never record, about the children in Prague and the man who had trafficked them, and the decision that had changed everything, about the price she had paid for that decision. They called me Nightingale, she said quietly, because I sang to the dying. I was a battlefield medic before I was anything else. I learned to save lives in places where death was the only certainty. And somewhere along the way, I learned to take them too. The three bikers sat in silence, processing information that challenged everything they thought they understood about the woman who had saved their lives. Why tell us this? Garrett asked finally. Because you need to understand what's coming. Dmitry Volkov isn't just a criminal seeking revenge. He's a man who spent 43 years in a Russian prison, nursing his hatred, planning his return. He will not stop. He will not negotiate. He will not show mercy. The only way this ends is with one of us dead. Then we make sure it's him, Bear said simply. Meredith looked at the big man, at the quiet certainty in his voice, and felt something shift in her chest. Why, she asked. You barely know me. You have no stake in this fight. Why risk your lives for a stranger? Bear was quiet for a long moment. 5 years ago, he said slowly, I lost my wife and my son. Drunk driver ran a red light. They died before the ambulance arrived. I was supposed to be with them that day. Had a last-minute change at work. Spent 2 years after that trying to drink myself into the grave so I could join them. He paused, his massive hands clenching and unclenching in his lap. The club saved me. Garrett found me passed out behind a bar in Billings, brought me in, gave me something to live for. A family. Brothers who had my back no matter what. He looked up at Meredith. You gave us the same thing. You didn't have to help us. You didn't have to fight for us, but you did. That makes you family. And family doesn't abandon family. Colt spoke next, his young voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for his 25 years. My old man was a mean drunk, he said. Used to beat my mom, beat me, beat anyone who looked at him wrong. I ran away when I was 17, lived on the streets for 2 years before the wolves took me in. First time in my life, anyone treated me like I mattered. He met Meredith's eyes with a directness that surprised her. You could have turned us over to those men yesterday. Could have saved yourself a lot of trouble. Instead, you hit us, protected us, stitched us up. No one's ever done anything like that for me. So yeah, maybe I'm scared. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm not leaving. Whatever happens, I'm staying. Garrett was the last to speak. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan, he said. Watched good men die because some desk jockey in Washington made a bad call. Lost my whole squad in Kandahar when our position got compromised by faulty intelligence. I was the only survivor. His voice was flat, controlled, but Meredith could see the pain beneath the surface. Came home with nothing. No family waiting, no job prospects, no idea how to be a civilian again. The wolves gave me a purpose, gave me brothers I could trust with my life, and now, he gestured at the room around them. Now I find out there's a 73-year-old woman who spent her life fighting the same kind of evil I fought overseas, who saved kids from monsters and paid for it with her peace. You think I'm going to walk away from that? You think any of us are? Meredith felt moisture gathering in her eyes and blinked it away. 43 years of running, hiding, pretending to be someone she was not. 43 years of believing that she would die alone, that the price of her choices was eternal isolation. And now, at the end of everything, she had found something she had stopped believing in long ago. A family. The intelligence arrived at midnight. Harrison had come through as she had known he would. The satellite phone buzzed with incoming data coordinates and photographs and communication intercepts that painted a detailed picture of Volkov's operation. He had been busy since his release. The 43 years in prison had not dulled his ambition or his resources. Within months of his freedom, he had rebuilt his network from the ground up, recruiting from the same pools of desperate and dangerous men that had served him before. His organization now spanned 3 continents, moving money and weapons, and worse, through channels that law enforcement could not touch. But his obsession remained singular. Finding the woman who had destroyed him in Prague. Finding Nightingale. He's been searching for you since the day he walked out of prison, Meredith read aloud from Harrison's report. Hired investigators, bribed intelligence officials, followed paper trails across Europe and America. He knew you had faked your death in Moldova. He just couldn't prove where you had gone. How did he find you? Garrett asked. Someone talked. Someone always talks. One of the few people who knew about my relocation probably bought or blackmailed years ago. Harrison is investigating, but it doesn't matter now. What matters is that Volkov has established a base of operations 40 miles from here. She pulled up the coordinates on a map she had spread across the kitchen table. An old hunting lodge in the Bitterroot Mountains. converted into a safe house with full security systems, satellite communications, and enough firepower to fight a small war. Harrison's estimates put his current force at 12 to 15 men, all former military or intelligence operatives. That's a lot of guns, Bear observed. Yes, but they have a weakness. Meredith tapped the map. They're not from here. They don't know the terrain, the weather patterns, the thousand small details that make the difference between life and death in these mountains. We do. She outlined her plan. They would not wait for Volkov to come to them. Waiting meant ceding the initiative, allowing him to choose the time and place of engagement. Instead, they would strike first, hit his safe house before he expected it, and eliminate his support structure before he could bring it to bear. It's risky, she admitted. We'll be outnumbered and outgunned. But surprise is a powerful equalizer. And I know how these men think. I trained alongside them. I know their tactics, their weaknesses, their blind spots. When do we move? Garrett asked. Tomorrow night. They'll be expecting us to hunker down and wait. They won't be expecting an assault. The day passed in preparation. Meredith walked them through the plan again and again until each man could recite his role from memory. She showed them the approach routes, the fallback positions, the emergency extraction points if everything went wrong. She made them practice until their movements were automatic, until they could function as a unit even in darkness and chaos. And when the sun began to set on their second day together, she gathered them one final time. I want you to understand something, she said. What we're about to do, there's no guarantee any of us walk away. These are dangerous men and we're about to kick their hornet's nest. If anyone wants to reconsider, now is the time. No one moved. Then let's go. They left under cover of darkness, traveling in an old pickup truck that Meredith had kept maintained for exactly this purpose. The roads wound through the mountains like serpents, climbing higher into terrain that grew increasingly wild and remote. No one spoke during the drive. Each man was lost in his own thoughts, preparing in his own way for what lay ahead. Meredith drove with the focused calm of someone who had done this 100 times before, her eyes scanning the darkness for threats that might materialize from any direction. They parked 2 miles from the target location and proceeded on foot. The night was cold, the temperature dropping toward freezing as they climbed through dense forest that muffled their footsteps. Meredith led the way, moving with a surety that belied her age, finding paths through the undergrowth that seemed invisible until she revealed them. The safe house appeared through the trees like a wound in the darkness. Lights glowed behind curtained windows. Vehicles sat parked in neat rows. Guards patrolled the perimeter in patterns that spoke of professional training, but also of complacency. They did not expect an attack. They believed they were the hunters, not the hunted. Meredith signaled for the others to hold position while she studied the compound. 8 guards visible, 2 more probably inside. The main building was a converted hunting lodge, solid construction, multiple entry points. Satellite dishes on the roof indicated sophisticated communications equipment. She counted the vehicles. 6 SUVs, all black, all with tinted windows. More than enough to transport a small army, but only 10 guards. Where were the others? The answer came to her with a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Volkov was not here. He had never been here. This was a decoy, a trap designed to draw her out while the real force moved on her property. She was already reaching for her satellite phone when the first shot rang out. Not at them, at the safe house. Meredith's blood froze as she realized what was happening. The guards were firing at something inside the compound, not outside. Shouts erupted in Russian confusion and alarm, mixing with the crack of automatic weapons. What the hell? Garrett whispered beside her. Before Meredith could answer, her satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read the words on the screen and felt her heart stop. I know where you are, Nightingale. I've always known. While you play soldier in the mountains, I am at your home, your lovely farm. Come back now or I will burn it to the ground and hunt you across the country. You have 2 hours. The message was signed with a single initial. V. Volkov had outmaneuvered her. While she had been planning her assault, he had been waiting, watching, letting her believe she had the initiative while he positioned his real force exactly where he wanted them, at her home. We have to go back, she said, her voice flat with controlled fury. Now! The drive back was a nightmare of speed and darkness. Meredith pushed the truck to its limits, taking curves at velocities that would have been suicidal in daylight. The others held on without complaint, understanding through some unspoken communication that questions could wait. They crested the final hill an hour and 40 minutes after receiving Volkov's message, and stopped. Below them, Meredith's property blazed with light. Not fire, not yet, but the harsh illumination of vehicle headlights arranged in a semicircle around her farmhouse. She counted 4 black SUVs, at least 12 men visible, armed, all positioned, with the professional precision of soldiers holding a defensive perimeter. And standing on her front porch as if he owned the place was a figure she had not seen in 43 years, Dmitry Volkov. Even from this distance, she could see how prison had changed him. The handsome young man she remembered from Prague had become a weathered monument to hatred, his face carved by decades of Siberian hardship into something that barely looked human. But his posture was the same. That arrogant certainty that the world existed for his pleasure and everyone in it was merely a tool to be used. He was waiting for her. He knew she would come. "How do you want to play this?" Garrett asked quietly. Meredith studied the tactical situation with the cold clarity that had kept her alive through 30 years of impossible odds. 12 men, maybe more. All professionals. Excellent defensive position. Clear fields of fire in every direction. Approaching unseen would be nearly impossible. But they had advantages too. The darkness beyond the perimeter lights. The terrain she knew better than anyone. And the element of surprise because Volkov expected her to negotiate, to stall, to play for time. He did not expect her to attack. "We split up," she said. "Garrett, you circle to the east and find a position with a clear line on the porch. Bear, you take the west. Colt, you're with me." "What's the plan?" Bear asked. Meredith's smile held no warmth. "I'm going to give Volkov exactly what he wants. A chance to gloat. And while he's busy enjoying his victory, you're going to take out as many of his men as possible. And then we improvise." She turned to face them, these three men who had become something more than strangers in the space of a few desperate days. "Whatever happens down there, I want you to know something. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to fight. But you did. And that means more to me than you will ever understand." Garrett nodded slowly. "We'll see you on the other side." They melted into the darkness, each man moving toward his assigned position with the quiet determination of soldiers going into battle. Meredith watched them go, then she began her own approach. The gravel of her own driveway crunched beneath Meredith's boots as she walked toward the circle of lights that surrounded her home. Her hands were raised, visible and empty, the universal gesture of someone who had come to talk rather than fight. The mercenaries tracked her approach with professional alertness, weapons trained on her center mass. She could feel the laser sights dancing across her chest, knew that any sudden movement would result in her immediate death. But she also knew something they did not. She was not alone. Somewhere in the darkness to the east, Garrett was settling into position, his sniper's eye already picking out targets. To the one, Bear waited with the patience of a predator, ready to unleash violence the moment the signal came. And behind her, moving through shadows she had mapped over 15 years of paranoid preparation, Colt followed at a distance, ready to act when the moment was right. Volkov watched her approach with the satisfied expression of a cat watching a mouse walk into a trap. "Elena," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still mountain air. "After all these years, you look old." Meredith stopped 20 feet from the porch, close enough to see the scars that prison had left on his face, far enough to have room to maneuver if things went wrong. 43 years in a Siberian cell will do worse to a man," she replied evenly. Volkov's smile widened, revealing teeth that had yellowed with age and neglect. "True enough, but I am here now and you are there, and after all this time we finally get to finish what we started in Prague. Is that what this is about, finishing something? This is about justice, Elena, about balance. You took everything from me, my empire, my freedom, my future. You left me with nothing but time and hatred. Now I take everything from you." He gestured at the farmhouse behind him, at the property she had tended for 15 years. "Lovely place. I can see why you chose it. The isolation, the defensible terrain, the clear sightlines. A professional's choice, as I said before. You were always good at your job. Not good enough, apparently, or you wouldn't be standing on my porch." Volkov laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "No, not good enough. You made a mistake in Prague, Elena. A sentimental mistake. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Instead, you gave me to the Czechs thinking prison would be punishment enough." He descended the porch steps slowly, savoring the moment. "Do you know what I did during those 43 years I thought about you? Every single day I thought about this moment. I planned it, refined it, perfected it. Every detail, every contingency, every possible outcome. I knew exactly how this would end before you even knew I was free." "And how does it end?" Volkov stopped just out of arm's reach, close enough that she could smell the prison on him, the decades of institutional food and harsh soap and endless grinding hatred. "It ends with you watching everyone you care about die. And then when you have nothing left, when you understand exactly what you took from me, then I will let you join them." He raised one hand and two of his mercenaries moved toward the farmhouse. "We found them, you know. Your little biker friends, hiding in that clever cellar beneath your kitchen. Did you really think I wouldn't search properly? Meredith's blood turned to ice. They have nothing to do with this. They have everything to do with this. Their leverage, their motivation. They're the first payment on a debt that can never truly be repaid. The mercenaries emerged from the house dragging someone between them. Colt, his face was bloodied, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that had to be excruciating. But his eyes, when they met Meredith's, held no fear, only apology. Found this one sneaking around the back, one of the mercenaries reported. The others are secured in the cellar. Volkov's smile became something terrible. You see, I told you I planned for every contingency. Did you really think you could outmaneuver me with 3 broken bikers and an old woman's tricks? He drew a pistol from his jacket, chrome-plated and gleaming in the harsh light of the headlamps. Now, let's begin. He pressed the gun against Colt's temple. First, I'm going to kill this boy. Slowly, while you watch. Then I'm going to bring out the others one by one and do the same. And when they're all gone, when you've seen everything you tried to protect reduced to nothing, then we'll discuss your own ending. Colt's eyes met hers again, and in that moment Meredith saw something she had not expected. Trust. Absolute, unwavering trust that she would find a way out of this. That she would not let him die. That somehow, despite everything, she would save them all. It was the same look she had seen in the eyes of young soldiers in field hospitals 30 years ago. The look of people who believed in her completely, who had put their lives in her hands without hesitation. She had sworn never to fail that trust again. Volkov, she said, her voice carrying a calm she did not feel. Before you pull that trigger, there's something you should know. What could you possibly tell me that would change anything? I didn't come here to negotiate. I didn't come here to beg for their lives. I came here to give you one last chance to walk away. Volkov stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing. Walk away. After 43 years, after everything you took from me, I'm offering you your life. Take your men and leave. Disappear into whatever hole you crawled out of, and I will let you live. You will let me live. You're surrounded by 12 armed professionals. Your friends are my prisoners, and you will let me live. Yes. Something in her tone made Volkov pause. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. You're bluffing. I never bluff. Ask anyone who knew me in the old days. Elena Vasquez was many things, but she never made threats she couldn't back up. Volkov's grip tightened on his pistol. Then you're senile. You've spent too long pretending to be a harmless old woman, and you've forgotten what you're dealing with. No, Meredith said quietly. You've forgotten what you're dealing with. You remember Elena Vasquez, the young operative who showed mercy instead of delivering death. You expected that same woman to show up tonight, frightened and desperate, ready to bargain for the lives of her friends. She took a step forward, and something in her posture made 2 of the mercenaries shift nervously. But Elena Vasquez died 30 years ago. The woman standing in front of you now is someone else entirely. Someone who has spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment. Someone who knows this property better than you know your own hands. Someone who has already positioned 3 shooters in the darkness around your perimeter. Volkov's eyes widened slightly. You're lying. Am I? Think about it, Dmitri. You came here expecting to find a scared old woman hiding in her house. Instead, you found an empty property and had to wait for me to return. Did you really think I was sitting in my kitchen, wringing my hands and hoping you wouldn't find me? She saw the doubt creeping into his expression, now the first crack in his certainty. I was at your safe house tonight, the decoy you set up in the mountains. I watched your guards panic when they realized someone had infiltrated their perimeter. I could have killed them all, but I didn't, because I knew you wanted me here. I knew this was where it would end. Another step forward. So here I am, just like you wanted, but not the way you wanted, not scared, not desperate, not willing to watch my people die while I beg for mercy. She met his eyes with a gaze that had made hardened killers flinch in a dozen different countries. Last chance, Dmitri, walk away. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Volkov's hand trembled slightly on his pistol, and she could see him calculating, reassessing, trying to determine how much of what she had said was truth and how much was desperate bluffing. Then his face hardened. Kill her. The mercenary to his left raised his weapon, and the world exploded. Garrett's first shot took the mercenary in the head before his finger could find the trigger. The second shot, a fraction of a second later, dropped the man holding Colt's arm. From the west side of the property, Bear opened up with the shotgun Meredith had given him, the thunderous blast sending men diving for cover. Chaos erupted. Meredith was already moving her body, responding to decades of training without conscious thought. She closed the distance to Volkov in 3 quick strides, her hand finding the flashbang grenade concealed in her sleeve. This was the moment she had prepared for. The skill she had practiced 1,000 times hidden in her barn where no one could see, maintaining techniques that she had prayed she would never need again. The grenade dropped into her palm. She activated it in one smooth motion and threw it directly at Volkov's feet. The world went white. When the light cleared, Meredith was on top of Volkov, her knee in his chest, her knife at his throat. The chrome-plated pistol lay somewhere in the gravel, knocked from his grip by the concussive force of the blast. Around them, the battle raged. Garrett's rifle cracked again and again, each shot finding its target with the precision of a man who had spent years learning to kill at distance. Bear advanced from the west, his shotgun roaring, driving mercenaries back into the darkness where they stumbled and fell. And Colt, freed from his captors, had found a weapon and was fighting with the desperate fury of a young man who refused to die. But Meredith saw none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the face of the man beneath her, the man who had haunted her dreams for 43 years, the man who had threatened everything she had built, everyone she had come to love. "You should have taken my offer," she said quietly. Volkov stared up at her, rage and disbelief warring in his eyes. "This isn't possible. I planned for everything. Everything. You planned for Elena Vasquez, the woman who showed mercy, the woman who couldn't bring herself to kill you in Prague because she wanted you to suffer." She pressed the knife harder against his throat, drawing a thin line of blood. "But that woman is gone now. She died a long time ago, and the woman who took her place doesn't believe in mercy anymore." "Wait," Volkov gasped. "Wait, we can make a deal. I have money, resources I can give you. You have nothing I want. Please, please, I spent 43 years in hell because of you. Doesn't that count for anything? Haven't I suffered enough?" Meredith looked into his eyes, searching for something human, some spark of redemption that might justify showing him the mercy he had never shown anyone else. She found nothing but hatred and fear. "You trafficked children," she said softly. "You put them in shipping containers like cargo and sold them to monsters. You ruined lives that had barely begun, and you would do it again given the chance. We both know you would. I can change. I swear I can change." "No, you can't." She drew the knife across his throat in one swift motion. It was not the brutal slash of vengeance she might have imagined during the long nights of her exile. It was clean, precise, professional. The way she had been trained to do it all those years ago in facilities that did not officially exist. Volkov's eyes went wide with shock. Then they went empty. Meredith stood slowly, the knife still dripping in her hand. Around her, the sounds of battle were fading. The mercenaries who had survived were fleeing into the darkness, their employer dead, their paychecks meaningless. Garrett was picking them off as they ran his rifle, speaking with methodical precision. Bear had taken a position near the barn covering the eastern approach. And Colt stood a few feet away, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the body at Meredith's feet. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Meredith looked at Dmitry Volkov, at the man who had haunted her for more than 4 decades, at the monster who would never hurt anyone again. "Yes," she said, "it's finally over." The sun rose 3 days later on a world that had changed in ways both visible and invisible. Meredith stood on her front porch, a cup of coffee cradled in her weathered hands, watching the light spread across the mountains she had called home for 15 years. The property showed signs of the battle that had taken place, bullet holes in the barn wall, churned earth, where vehicles had maneuvered in the darkness, a lingering smell of cordite that the mountain wind was slowly carrying away. But it was still her home, still the sanctuary she had built, still worth fighting for. Behind her, the farmhouse was quiet. Garrett had gone into town for supplies, taking the old pickup truck that had survived the chaos better than anyone had expected. Bear was in the barn tending to the equipment that had been damaged during the fight, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he worked. And Colt sat on the porch steps, his young face carrying new lines that had not been there a week ago. He stared at the mountains without really seeing them, lost in thoughts that Meredith understood all too well. She sat down beside him. "You haven't slept," she said. It was not a question. "Can't close my eyes without seeing it. The fighting, the blood, the look on that man's face when you—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Meredith nodded slowly. "It gets better," she said. "Not easier exactly, but more bearable. You learn to carry it without letting it crush you." "How long does that take?" "Depends on the person. Depends on whether you have people to help you through it." She put a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this cult. Whatever you're feeling, whatever nightmares come, you don't have to face them by yourself." He looked at her, and she saw the tears he was trying to hide. I killed people. Real people with families and lives, and I can still feel the gun in my hands. Still feel the recoil. Still see them falling. I know. How do you live with it? After all the things you've done, how do you get up in the morning and face yourself in the mirror? Meredith considered the question carefully. It was the same question she had asked herself in various forms for more than 40 years. You remember why you did it, she said finally. You remember that the people you fought were trying to hurt innocents. You remember that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to meet it with force. And you try every day to be worthy of the weight you carry. Is that enough? Some days, other days, nothing feels like enough. But you keep going anyway because the alternative is giving up. And giving up means letting the darkness win. Colt was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted. The club life, I mean. I thought I knew what I was getting into when I joined the Wolves, but this is different. This is real. It is real. And you're right to question whether you want to stay in that world. But Colt, there's something you need to understand. She waited until he met her eyes. What happened here wasn't about the club. It wasn't about territory or money or any of the things that usually start wars. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. It was about standing up when everyone else would have run away. You could have died. All of us could have died. Yes, but we didn't. And the people who would have hurt us, who would have gone on hurting others if we hadn't stopped them, they're the ones who paid the price. That counts for something. Colt's expression shifted, something settling in his features that might have been the beginning of acceptance. So what happens now? It was Garrett who answered, emerging from the tree line where the road began. He had walked the last quarter mile, the truck parked somewhere out of sight. Now we decide what kind of people we want to be, he said, climbing the porch steps to join them. Now we figure out if we're going to let this define us or if we're going to define ourselves. He looked at Meredith with an expression she had not seen before. Respect certainly, but something else too, something warmer. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days. About the club, about my life, about what I want from whatever time I have left. And what did you decide? Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the property that had become a battlefield and was slowly becoming a home again. I decided that I'm tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of being angry at a world that doesn't care whether I exist or not. He turned to face her directly. I decided that I want to stay. Meredith felt something tighten in her chest. Stay? Here, with you if you'll have me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Neither of them was quite ready to name. I'm 73 years old, Meredith said slowly. I have enough enemies left to fill a cemetery, and I'm not the easiest person to live with. I know. I have nightmares, bad ones. I wake up some nights convinced I'm back in Prague, back in Moldova, back in any of a dozen places where people tried to kill me. I have nightmares too. Maybe we can keep each other company. She studied his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. She found none. Why betanden? She asked finally, but you barely know me. You have a life, a club brothers who need you. Garrett's smile was sad and knowing. I know you better than anyone I've ever met. I've seen you at your worst and your best. I've watched you kill, and I've watched you heal. I've seen the woman behind the legend, and she's more real than anyone I've ever known. He reached out and took her hand. I've spent my whole life looking for somewhere to belong. Thought I found it in the Marines, thought I found it in the club, but it was always temporary, always conditional, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. His grip tightened. But here with you, this feels different. This feels like home, and I don't want to leave it. Meredith looked at their joined hands, at this stranger who had become something more, at the future she had never allowed herself to imagine. The roof needs fixing, she said finally. I know. The fence has to be mended before winter. I can handle that. And I'm too old to change who I am. The past will always be part of me. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to let me be part of whatever comes next. Bear and Colt had emerged from wherever they had been drawn by the conversation, or perhaps by some instinct that this was a moment worth witnessing. They stood together near the barn watching, waiting. Meredith looked at all of them. At Bear with his massive frame and gentle heart, still carrying the weight of losses that would never fully heal. At Colt, young and scared and desperately trying to find his way in a world that had suddenly become much more complicated. At Garrett, offering her something she had stopped believing she deserved. A family. Not the family she was born into, which had ended in tragedy before she was old enough to remember their faces. Not the family of operatives and handlers she had worked alongside for 30 years, most of whom were dead or scattered to the winds. but a family nonetheless. A family of choice. A family forged in blood and fire, and the simple, profound decision to stand together against whatever the world might bring. Bear Colt, she called out. Come here. They approached, slowly, uncertainty written on their faces. There's something we need to discuss, Meredith said. All of us. Together. She took a breath, organizing thoughts she had not expected to share. I've spent 43 years running from my past, hiding behind false names and fabricated histories and always waiting for the day when everything would catch up with me. And now it has. The worst enemy I ever made is dead, and I'm still standing. She looked at each of them in turn. But I'm also 73 years old. I've outlived everyone I ever served with, everyone I ever loved, everyone who knew who I really was before I became Meredith Blackwood. I thought I would die alone on this farm, and I had made peace with that. Her voice softened. Then you three showed up in my driveway, bleeding and broken, and everything changed. You gave me something to fight for, something to protect. And in doing that, you gave me something I hadn't had in a very long time. What's that? Colt asked quietly. Hope. The word hung in the air, simple and profound. So here's what I'm proposing. This farm needs work. I need help. And all of you need a place to figure out what comes next. Stay here. All of you, for as long as you want. Help me rebuild what we broke, and maybe in the process we can all rebuild a little bit of ourselves. Bear and Colt exchanged glances. What about the club? Bear asked. The wolves won't just let us walk away. The wolves can find new members, but families. Real families, those are harder to come by. She smiled, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the expression felt natural. Besides, from what I've seen, you're all terrible at being outlaws anyway. Maybe honest work would suit you better. The tension broke. Colt laughed, a surprised sound that seemed to catch even him off guard. Bear's face cracked into a grin that transformed his intimidating features into something almost boyish. She's got a point, Garrett said dryly. We did manage to get ourselves beaten half to death within a week of riding through Montana. Speak for yourself, Bear rumbled. I've been beaten worse playing poker. The laughter that followed was healing in a way that none of them could have explained. It was the sound of people who had survived something terrible and were only now allowing themselves to believe they might actually be okay. That night they sat together on Meredith's porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the Montana sky. Colt and Bear had claimed the chairs on either side while Garrett sat beside Meredith on the old porch swing that Arthur had built their first summer together. No one spoke for a long time. Words seemed inadequate for what they had experienced, what they had survived, what they were now beginning to build. The silence was comfortable, the kind that only exists between people who have nothing left to prove to each other. Finally, Bear's deep voice broke the quiet. So what do we do tomorrow? Meredith considered the question. Tomorrow we start rebuilding the fence. The day after we work on the barn. After that we prepare for winter because it comes early in the mountains and stays late. And then we do it again. Day after day, season after season, until one day we wake up and realize we've built something that matters, something worth protecting. That sounds nice, Colt said softly. It is nice. It's the nicest thing there is, actually. Having something worth getting up for in the morning. Having people who count on you and who you can count on in return. She looked at the young man, seeing the fear that still lingered in his eyes, but also the spark of something else. Something that might, with time and care, grow into hope. You asked me how I live with what I've done. This is how. By building instead of destroying. By protecting instead of attacking. By earning every single day the right to still be here. Garrett's hand found hers in the darkness. Sounds like a good plan to me. The days that followed were filled with work. Honest work. Physical work. The kind of work that left muscles aching and minds quiet, that replaced the chaos of combat with the simple satisfaction of seeing progress take shape before your eyes. Garrett proved to have a talent for carpentry that surprised everyone, including himself. He threw himself into rebuilding the damaged sections of fence with a focus that bordered on obsession, finding peace in the repetitive motion of hammer and nail. Bear discovered an unexpected passion for the garden. His massive hands, capable of such violence, turned gentle when handling seedlings and tender plants. He spent hours preparing the beds for winter mulching and protecting the perennials that would return in spring. Colt struggled more than the others. The nightmares came regularly, dragging him from sleep with gasping breaths and racing heart. But each morning he got up. Each day he found something to contribute. And slowly, so slowly that no one could point to the exact moment it happened, the haunted look in his eyes began to fade. Meredith watched them all with a mixture of pride and wonder. These broken men who had stumbled into her life, who had stood beside her against impossible odds, who were now learning to build instead of destroy. She had thought her story was over, had believed in the darkest hours of her solitude that there was nothing left for her but waiting for death in the quiet of her Montana farm. She had been wrong. One evening about 3 weeks after the battle, Colt approached her while she was sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire. "Can I ask you something?" Meredith nodded. "You've done terrible things. We've all done terrible things now. How do you keep going? How do you find meaning in a life built on so much death?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "You remember the children in Prague," she said finally, "the ones I saved. You mentioned them, in the shipping containers. 43 years ago, I looked into those containers and saw something that broke me. Children terrified and alone being sold like livestock to the highest bidder. And in that moment, I made a choice that would define the rest of my life." She turned to face him. "I could have followed orders, killed Volkov, quietly cleaned up the scene, and let the machinery of international diplomacy handle the rest. The children would probably have been freed eventually through proper channels following proper procedures. But you didn't do that. No, I burned it all down instead, destroyed his entire operation, freed every child I could find, and handed him to the authorities with enough evidence to bury him forever. It cost me my career, my identity, and any hope of a normal life." "Do you regret it?" Meredith smiled. "Not for a second, because those children survived. They grew up, had families of their own, lived lives that would have ended in horror if I had done nothing. I don't know their names. I'll never see their faces. But I know they exist because I chose to act when it would have been easier to look away." She put a hand on his shoulder. "That's how you find meaning, Colt. Not by pretending the darkness doesn't exist, but by choosing to be the light that pushes it back. Every life you save, every person you protect, every small act of kindness in a world full of cruelty, it all matters. It all counts." Colt's eyes glistened. "I don't know if I can be that person. You already are. You stood beside me when you could have run. You fought for people you barely knew. You're here right now trying to figure out how to be better instead of giving up. That's more than most people ever manage." The young man was quiet for a long time, processing her words. "Thank you," he said finally, "for everything. Thank me by living a life worth the price we paid. That's all any of us can do." Winter came early that year as Meredith had predicted. The first snow fell in late October, blanketing the property in white and transforming the mountains into a wonderland of ice and silence. The four of them gathered in the farmhouse, warm and safe, while the world outside turned cold and hostile. They had enough supplies to last until spring, enough firewood to keep the house warm, enough of each other's company to keep the loneliness at bay. And somehow, without any of them quite realizing when it happened, they had become a family. Not the traditional kind bound by blood and legal documents. Something more fragile, perhaps, but also more precious. A family built on choice, on shared experience, on the simple decision to keep showing up for each other day after day. On Christmas Eve, they sat together in the living room while snow fell softly outside the windows. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls that had witnessed so much violence just weeks before. Garrett had somehow managed to acquire a small tree which Colt and Bear had decorated with whatever they could find. It was lopsided and sparse, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. "I never thought I'd have this," Meredith said quietly, watching the flames dance. "A family, a home, people who actually care whether I live or die." "You spent your whole life taking care of others," Garrett replied. "Maybe it's time someone took care of you." "That's not how it works. That's not how it's supposed to work." "Says who?" "Some rulebook for retired spies." He smiled. "Meredith, you've earned this. You've earned peace and happiness and people who love you. Stop fighting it." She looked at him, at this man who had walked into her life through circumstance and stayed by choice. "I don't know how to stop fighting. It's all I've ever done." "Then let us teach you. Let us show you what it feels like to rest, to trust, to believe that tomorrow will come and you'll still be here to see it." Bear raised his mug of hot cider. "To tomorrow," he said simply. Colt lifted his own mug. "To family." Garrett met Meredith's eyes as he raised his drink. "To second chances." And Meredith, surrounded by people she had never expected to find, lifted her mug as well. "To all of it," she said. "Every moment, every day, every chance we get to be better than we were." They drank together, and the warmth that spread through her had nothing to do with the cider. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, a family sat together in the light. And for the first time in 43 years, Meredith Blackwood allowed herself to believe that the war was truly finally over, that she had earned her rest, that she was home.